All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Theosciphilosophy. It is the fourth course in integrated theology, and we're talking about integration of tertiary knowledge. Remember, tertiary knowledge or tertiary knowledge is the foundational knowledges of knowledge, which is ology, then philosophy and theology. So today we're going to talk about Theosciphilosophy, bridging the divide. Let's dive in. I am your host, Bishop Dr. Terry K. Reeves, and it begins. When we discuss Theosciphilosophy, bridging the divide is literally a very complex feat in such academic studies that in many cases, they divide them, and then they will bespeak of each of these portions, and then they will tell you how they function, and then ultimately add them in. But in many cases, the test and the parentheticals operate individually. For Theosciphilosophy to gain the greatest understanding of it, you have to be able to utilize them all succinctly within a systematic format. Those pursuits that incorporate what is deemed to be science, and then those pursuits or the branches of study that incorporate the ideals of philosophy, which will add metaphysics. Metaphysics is considered to go against every foundation of science that makes science science. And that's one of the reasons why philosophy and the philosophical are generally divorced from the scientific. Metaphysics comes from two words, meta, which means after or beyond, and physics, the natural things, or physica. And so metaphysics beyond or after you deal with the physical laws of the universe. And so it's believed to be coined by an editor of Aristotle's works on the treatise of physics. Metaphysics supposes that there are other types of existences beyond the physical material realm of existence. Therefore, science debunks it because science says that you have to be able to observe it, record it, make it either falsifiable or validated through tests. And because you cannot see beyond the physical world, then science says that's all conjecture and it's not real science. But the fact of the matter is, we've never seen the edge of the universe. We've never seen dark matter, strange matter. We've never seen a lot of things, but they conjecture as to how it works. And that's why the field of physics is always changing. This also supposes that there is a state of transcendence beyond our three-dimensional reality. And because it is beyond the three-dimensional reality in which really science says we actually have four dimensions because they add space and time in there together. But most scientists say space-time is interwoven. And so that becomes I'll say, positional reality, because where you are determines time, and what you're doing where you are, even the altitude or how low, it determines time. And we talked about this, I believe, last week, where we said that if you go one way around the earth counterclockwise, then you go clockwise, time speeds up so many thousands of microseconds, and then it reverses the other way. They also found that the higher you are with an atomic clock, then time seems to lessen as you go higher, and it becomes more active as you are lower. So metaphysics is basically understood as the study of what comes after or beyond the physical world. Then there is epistemology. Epistemology is closely related to metaphysics and are sometimes intertwined. Episteme, which deals with knowledge, ology, the study of knowledge. And so epistemology then looks at knowledge as the topic of study. What then is knowledge? How does the mind come to know? And what is it that you're knowing? And how is knowledge transmitted, even through codes, even through vocal structures, through words, through letters? It's been estimated that certain consonant sounds, certain syllables, cause people to shut down, and also it activates some people's desire to hear. And so, how you are speaking, what you are saying, determines whether a person will keen in or whether they will back up, depending on how they have trained themselves. Epistemology will generally focus on the nature and limits of knowledge. What is the nature of knowledge? We understand knowledge as interpreted sound of, again, letters, vowels, consonants, words, phrases, sentences, and through the hearing and the transmission of this, then we're able to take it in through certain areas of the brain, and those certain areas of the brain enable us to interpret the sounds, the pitches, the tone, the timbre, and all of that. Metaphysics may explore the metaphysical implication of knowledge, or what is the difference between reality and knowledge. It is for this reason that I consider epistemology to be metaphysical in a sense. It is not physical, but subjective in that it is abstract and immaterial. All knowledge you receive and you interpret in your mind, it's really subjective. It's how you think it. It is abstract. It deals with concepts and principles, and your mind begins to interpret it, reinterpret it, until you come to some clarity. Although knowledge occurs because of the soul interacting with the physical realm, and this is a dualistic point of view, where science says we don't believe that there's a soul, so it's all interactions in the physical, with the brain, with the energy, and with chemicals. The dualistic point of view says there is something that is a living, sentient entity that operates through the brain to receive that information and interpret it. And this is what most Christians believe, a dualistic point of view, a living soul that is integrated into the brain, into the body, that gains information of the physical world through the five senses. Although knowledge can occur because of the soul interacting with the physical realm, again, the dualistic point of view, knowledge in and of itself is not physical. And that's what we have to understand. Knowledge. You can put a lot of knowledge in a computer. As a matter of fact, more information through text can go into a computer, and the software doesn't add to the weight of the computer. And that's how we know it's immaterial. Everything you take in your soul does not change or add to the structure of your physical. It can realign the brain and cause certain pathways to become stronger and more connected, but it does not add weight. And that's how we know it's non-physical. Knowledge is immaterial in nature and is in and of itself conceptual, not something you can touch, weigh, or measure. And when I mean measure, measure physically. You can measure the extent of knowledge you have by looking at the degree in which knowledge can progress. but you cannot measure it with a ruler. Knowledge can be stored in a material, physical container, such as books, brains, and computers. If the container of knowledge is destroyed, knowledge still exists. And that's the important thing. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean it's not there and it's not applicable and that it's not able to be found. Plato suggested that there are realms of ideals, and he called these realms of ideals forms that exist independently of the physical world. And we could dive into this for the next month, because when you're talking about forms that exist beyond the physical world, in a sense, he's right, because a form doesn't necessarily have to be a physical form. A form can be a conceptual, idealistic form. There is something about the existence of knowledge, and knowledge is a reality. It's just not a material reality, because we deal with knowledge every day. And if we're dealing with knowledge every day, are we dealing with something that's a fantasy? A knowledge then of something gives us a purview of how a system responds and how a system reacts and how things behave. Knowledge of wood, is that just a fantasy, or is it a realization of a form of existence? And that is something that's very important. And so, again, he thought that these physical realms, which were what we call the material universe, they were something different from the forms of knowledge. So Plato thought true knowledge resides in an unchanging, non-physical realm, of which the physical realm is only an imperfect reflection. And so he's dividing physical from minciological, information from existence. Now, if we wanted to speak about this in a I'll say, not psychological, but philosophical, then we could literally say that the form of knowledge then can be integrated into the physical, because everything that is physical and is formed, there is knowledge that goes into the atom, just like your genetic system. There is knowledge that makes up your genetic code. There is knowledge that makes up the elemental code of everything that is material. It is combined with a systemic amount of matter, elements, energy that holds it together. All of the atomic structures or the atoms, they are incorporated in such a way that they form a certain type of molecule that allows specific things to exist. And so literally everything you see is encoded with information. And so it's very important. Knowledge occurs in the human brain and immaterial mind because of an interaction with the immaterial soul and the sensory mechanisms of the body. And so your body then, through your senses, detect hard, soft, smell, sweet, sour, taste, hearing, loud, pleasant. And that's very interesting, because you could not receive information that your brain and your mind would use without it to understand the physical world. And that's what it means to be earth linked. You are linked to the earth. Everything you know that is natural comes through your 5 natural senses. And so the physical reaction of electrical sparks and chemicals within the brain enable the brain to come to receive that and transfer it into the mind. And so within the brain, there should be a mental reception of information and the ability to use it to gain knowledge of what you're sensing. Is there a possibility that knowledge exists as a reality of energy beyond the physical realm in which the immaterial soul can interact? It's a very good question, because I believe that there's more than one type of knowledge. There is experiential knowledge, and then there is revelatory knowledge, knowledge that can be revealed only by God to lesser creatures. And then there is ultimate knowledge, which is what we call omniscience. It is knowledge of the transcendent. It is knowledge of time. It is knowledge of everything at the same time and everywhere at the same time. Every unique difference in the fabric of space, every rising and falling of an atom, of a quantum energy, every cessation and every exchange, how energy interacts, and all of the diverse laws and rules. And again, that's why physics always changes their books, because what they believe to be true, they find out there's always an exception to the rule. And we can look even in natural chemistry. There are some things that you heat up, they become more solidified. Some things that you freeze, they become liquefied. And so the laws of physics are not stable. And that's because I believe when you leave out pertinent information, that there's more than just the physical laws, and that there are things and information that channel into the physical world and cause the physical world to behave in such a way. The physicists or the physicalists and the materialists, they argue such that there exists what is called the supervenience of the physical. And so the supervenience, then, this is the reason some physicists or physicalists, and some go by that situation, they lean toward physicality or physicalism, because knowledge itself may not appear to be physical, but they say it is ultimately a phenomenon that is supervenous, which means it operates on physical processes. It only occurs after there are physical effects, such as you touch, the sensation, you smell, the aroma. This supposes that knowledge is dependent upon physical states of the brain activity and of the physical body. Because physical activity seems to cause a change and a continuation in knowledge, knowledge is assumed to be somehow linked to material and physical existence. And we've already described that you, through natural knowledge, have to use your senses to gain an understanding on how you're interacting with this. Knowledge from a scientific position is encoded information within physical systems such as neurons, DNA, and digital data. While this information is immaterial and is abstract itself, it exists and is manipulated by physical substrates and processes. And it's very important. This can be best understood when one realizes that man is not just physical, but he is within himself what we call geriatric, existing in what it should be tertiaric, but sometimes a spell check changes things. So he is tertiaric existing in three states of existence as an integrated trichotomic being, body, soul, and spirit. The spirit is definitely immaterial, as is the soul. The body is physical, material, but is given life by the two immaterial elements. And so the physical and the immaterial, they exist together, even in the material world. The mind, empowered by the spirit, enables individuated desires and choices that are preferred. The spirit, remember, when we talk about spirit, we're talking about breath. Breath then brings consciousness. Therefore, breath can be consciousness of information, and when the spirit moves, it is consciousness of spiritual realities. Eschatologically speaking, the living soul is using the body to receive impulse energy that is turned into usable information. This is the biblical consensus of a living soul, existing within a physical body and operating through a physical brain. This has always been the problem with understanding the nature of man, the reconciling of the concepts of materialism, wherein man is believed to be hardwired physical reality, which includes the mind as a system of physical processes and interactions within the body, or there is a dualistic approach wherein man is a compound of physical somatic parts and two immaterial subsistences or substances, which we call spirit and soul. The immaterial spirit and the immaterial soul are these two substances. Historical efforts of integrating theology, science, and philosophy. There is a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher or philosophy that is called natural philosophy. And so these philosophers are called natural philosophers. These philosophers moved away from the mythical explanations of the cosmos. Such individuals were Thales of Miletus. He lived 624 BC in what we call modern-day Turkey, which is now called Turkey. He proposed that natural phenomena were materialistic and not mythical or theological. He did not acknowledge the existence of gods or God or the supernatural. He was totally materialistic. And then there is Anaximander, who lived 610 BC, born in Miletus, and he studied under Thales and adopted, for the most part, a materialistic point of view concerning the cosmos. Known for his argument about the boundless, which is, as he called it, the origin of all that is. The boundless was considered to be certain infinite nature, which was the principle of the things that exist. From this infinite nature, the heavens and the worlds were brought into existence. He never describes by who and by what. And as you go on a little further, you begin to see that this is kind of like a God who has no sentience. From this infinite nature, the heavens and the worlds were brought into existence. This existence is eternal, ageless, and contains all worlds. Now, again, this is the boundless. Anaximander believed that everything originated from what he called the apeiron. Some say apeiron, but it is apeiron, the infinite, the unlimited, or the indefinite. This apeiron was not considered to be God, but a natural existence. The term apeiron literally meant without limit, boundless. And so when we look at the term apeiron, it comes from without, and the word peras, P-E-R-A-S, which means end, limit, or boundary. And so it deals with a lack of spatial and temporal perimeters. It is spatial and temporal boundlessness. Without spatial limits, to be infinitely extended. Infinitely extended simply means that it goes on and on and on. And maybe when we get time, we'll discuss the 5 types of infinity that scientists deal with. It is eternal and ageless. It is qualitatively indeterminate, which means you don't know what its quality is, and you can never know. Anaximander proposed that the apeiron must be something that is qualitatively indefinite and without properties of its own, which, when we examine it, really doesn't make sense. Because if you exist and you have no properties that are your own, then what are you and what is your existence? Because in the mind of Anaximander, the world is characterized by opposites, hot, cold, wet, dry, the ark could not give rise to the opposite without being destroyed or ceasing to be itself. Therefore, the apeiron, being indeterminate, can generate all opposites without being limited by any of them. And then again, this existing natural state that is not God, that is not a mind, but yet it generates. It still leaves a lot of questions as to what is causing the generation from this apeiron. The apeiron was considered to be divine, but not in the anthropomorphic sense of the Olympian gods. And again, when you look this up, there is a lot of queries and a lot of discussion in how people pronounce Greek terminology, just like most people in modernity call kairos that time. But when you look at the syllabic formula in Strong's, it is kairos. And so I remember my Greek instructor said there is no right way, wrong way. But again, it depends on the system of Greek. And that's one of the reasons why there's always arguments. I've seen people, when somebody says kairos, you mean kairos? And I've seen people, kairos, oh, you mean kairos? Because we favor our system and we make it the law. This boundless apeiron, it was seen as being eternal and ageless. It had no beginning or end, no birth or decay or death. It was the ultimate source. As the ark, the origin or the first principle of all things arise and return to it. And so it's saying that this is the source of the ark, which is the principle that creates all reality. This apeiron held a supreme foundational status. It was seen as an ultimate reality that sustained the cosmos. It was the governing principle. The generation and destruction of all things occurred according to necessity or judgment. Now, how this immaterial, materialistic thing that has no image or substance of itself and is not a God, is not sentient, can determine what is justice. And as I said, we can study this and talk about it at other times and dive a little deeper. This implied governing and ordering principles at work. This assured or ensured balance and prevented any single element from permanently dominating others. And so he's talking about something that has the capacity to differentiate and to relegate. Very important. Aristotle states that Anaximander regarded the empyrean to be divine. Aristotle himself conceived of a person or prime mover. Aristotle did not recognize the divine qualities that Anaximander attributed to the apeiron. And so the apeiron was not a personal God, but was seen as being impersonal. Considered to be an it was not a personal, conscious, or anthropomorphic deity as God, as considered to be the God of Abraham. The apeiron did not think, did not feel, or directly intervene in the world in a volitional way. And so when we talk about governance, governance was more akin to an inherent natural law or principle of cosmic balance. This apeiron was not a creator in the sense of Genesis. It did not create the world from nothing in a singular act. It was the eternal, inexhaustible source out of which the world continually separates and differentiates itself through eternal motion. And we look at it and say, this is crazy, but science says the universe is eternal, it is infinite, it has always been. And the Big Bang is the universe coming into view, but it has existed long before. And there are many different, I'll say, systems of the Big Bang. It is a continual process of generation and destruction, not a one-time creative or creational event. This apeiron was like an endless, shapeless, all-encompassing stuff that had no qualities, no specific qualities of its own being, but was the source of everything. It was the cause of the definite things we see in the world, like fire, water, earth, air, and all the things that arise from them. The apeiron was considered to be a causational law or system that was eternally active. How did this law come to be? How was it constructed? And how and what energy, what intelligence causes it to operate? Yet remains to be seen in this philosophy. It was eternal motion and activity, eternally, perpetually active. This action drives the process of generation and destruction. It isn't a passive reservoir. It's the active source from which all things, all the heavens, all the worlds in them come to be, and of which they return when they cease to be. It was an ongoing process of a continual cycle of coming into being and passing away. Existence and annihilism all flow from this apeiron. The rebuttal concerning the apeiron. It was a causational force of law that caused all things to arise into being and also caused all things to be destroyed and go back into itself. It was non-moved motion. Very interesting. That appeared to be the cause of active laws, and yet it was not intelligent. It was not thinking. It was not the embodiment of a personal living being. It was an eternal and infinite mover that was not moved or originated by a cause. Doesn't this sound like the theistic God? But it robs him of all his intelligence, his individuality, and his wisdom and knowledge. It was an eternal and infinite mover that was not moved or originated by a cause. There can be not or no law or force of moving law, that is causation without being caused by a living mind or being. That is the rebuttal. A law must be constructed. A law must be set into action. A law must have intelligence and that energy that makes it work. Therefore, the Apeiron needed a cause. How did you get there if you're not a living being? How do you operate? How do you know to operate? How can you cause things to come from you if there is no intelligent causer or systematizer? So there can be no law or force of moving that is causation without being caused by a living mind or being. Therefore, the Apeiron needed a cause and a lawgiver or author of the law that defined its purpose and power to do something. A law is generally a process or system set into motion by a lawmaker or a lawgiver. Law cannot act or originate itself and operate within an elaborate system. And we'll stop right here.